Am I blurry or am I going blind? Miko! Sorry, it's not you. It's the ahs, you know? It's really hard when you're sticking with that one vowel sound. You want to sing with me? Come up! But Daddy, I love him! And then King Triton blasts her statue of Eric to pieces! This is kind of the reality of the world. And doesn't it effing suck? I can't talk to you. I just don't. What are we gonna relate on? Literally, what are we gonna have in common? A lot of people don't know what this is referencing, and it's a little bit awkward, but thankfully, you know, she's got thingamabobs. As you can see already, probably, I love The Little Mermaid a lot. And today, I'm actually going to rip it apart. What sparked my interest was actually a podcast called Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell. Maybe you've heard of it. And in this podcast, he tackles things that are misunderstood. At least that's how I understand his podcast. In Epcot, my dog is coughing up her lung. I think Miko might have kennel cough. It's a little bit of an issue. I know, I'm 27. I'm literally 27 and I have a Little Mermaid Barbie. Just know that it took a lot for me to be vulnerable and show you all this crazy childish shit. The opening scenes of The Little Mermaid give me absolute chills with the men on the ship and they're singing that sea shanty and it's like fine or whatever. But then you go down in the water and you just hear that music, that beautiful music. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to see that for the first time in theaters. Like, how freaking magical. Good old 1989. I was -6 years old. My dog's coming up to me like, Mommy, what? I can't do it justice. I still believe wholeheartedly that Part of Your World is the best Disney song ever written. The only thing that even comes close to me is Circle of Life. No other song that Disney has created gives me that out-of-body experience. Look at this trove, treasures untold. How many wonders can one cavern hold? Sure. She's got everything. I've got gadgets and gizmos aplenty. I've got who's it and what's it's galore. What would I give to live where you are? What would I pay to stay here beside you? Just you and me. And I could be part of your world. The reprises is really the best. Gets me every time, that reprise. So good. Can you believe that I was almost cut from the movie? Yes, it was written by the brilliant Disney songwriter Howard Ashman. He died of AIDS in the early 90s. He actually was a gay man, and he hid the fact that he had AIDS for a very long time from Disney, so he was working while he was incredibly sick, and he was just trying to push through it, and hoping that he would be okay. He wrote Part of Your World, and Disney wanted to cut it. And that was incredibly upsetting for him, as you might imagine, because as he said, and many people have said since, that's the heart of the movie. I think that song really is what made me love The Little Mermaid so much and what still makes me love it so much today. This is the heart of humanity. This is what it is like to be a little girl and longing to be an adult, really, and longing to grow up and longing to fall in love and all of those amazing things that felt so far out of reach when you're growing up and you're just a little kid. When did I first see The Little Mermaid? I know I was less than 2 years old. I may have been less than 1. There's actually a picture of me holding my Ariel and my Belle Barbie dolls because that's really all I wanted for Christmas that year. I loved Belle and Ariel so much. I wanted to be just like them. And as I got older, Ariel quickly replaced Belle as my favorite Disney princess. And I think the reason why is because Ariel is full of this longing, like I said, that I can relate to. She's a little bit more of a rebel than Belle, in my opinion, and she's got this deep yearning. She's not the most well-behaved of her sisters. She's boy crazy, if we're being honest, and that's something I could relate to from too early of an age, unfortunately. I remember in middle school, or it might have been late elementary school, my mom got this Little Mermaid anniversary edition DVD, and on the DVD there were loads of extras, and of course I watched all of them. And one of the extras was a virtual ride-through of this planned Little Mermaid ride, and I was so excited, and I remember just thinking to myself, if only this was a ride, I would love this so much. And of course it actually did become a ride that's now in California Adventure, and it was virtually identical to what I had watched many, many times on my DVD. So a lot of people were like, oh, look at this new ride, and I'm like, I've ridden it before actually. And they're like, what? When I was a senior in high school, I started stressing a little bit less about homework, and so after my extracurriculars in the evenings, I would often watch Disney movies. And as I was watching The Little Mermaid one day, I had this thought, wow, that was shorter than I remembered. Or it didn't have as much substance or something, or a combination of the two. What I now know is that I was sensing something was wrong with the movie, and I just wasn't quite nailing it on the head. Later, I would really come to terms with exactly what was wrong with this movie and what weird feeling I was feeling at that time. So let's talk a little bit about the original Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid was written by Danish author Hans Christian Andersen in 1836. Unfortunately, Hans was a very troubled man. The rumor has it that he was a gay man, and right before he wrote The Little Mermaid, the rumor also has it that he was actually rejected by a man that he loved. And of course at that time, being a gay man wasn't accepted. He also longed to be a part of a theater, another community that rejected him in a way. In fact, so many of his stories were about these rejected individuals who felt like they couldn't be part of a community that they wanted to be in. Of course, The Little Mermaid, and another famous one that has a similar sentiment is The Ugly Duckling. When Hans Christian Andersen was asked if he would ever write a biography, he said, I already have. Hans Christian Andersen wrote many other fairy tales that you're likely familiar with. My dog is maybe dying, so I'm gonna let her sit with me for a second. The Princess and the Pea, The Ugly Duckling, Thumbelina, The Little Match Girl, The Emperor's New Clothes, which partially inspired Disney's Emperor's New Groove, and The Snow Queen, which also partially inspired Disney's Frozen. Truth be told, the original is arguably less problematic than the Disney version. As Malcolm Gladwell put it in Revisionist History, Disney got a little sloppy when writing The Little Mermaid. In the original, the biggest personality trait of The Little Mermaid is that she deeply longs to be part of another world. Ariel is actually a lot more rebellious than Hans Christian Andersen's version of The Little Mermaid. She's described as thoughtful and quiet and full of this deep sadness and longing to be part of another world. She's also not quite as boy crazy. She still loves the prince, and that's a huge motivation for her to sacrifice her fins and her voice to have human legs, but there's something else going on there. Something a lot bigger than a boy. Let me tell ya. By the way, there's a grandmother in this story. If men are not drowned, asked the Little Mermaid, do they live forever, or do they die as we do down here in the sea? Yes, said the old lady. They have to die too, and their lifetime is even shorter than ours. We may live here for 300 years, but when we cease to exist, we become mere foam on the water, and do not have so much as a grave among our dear ones. We have no immortal souls. We have no future life. We are just like the green seaweed, which once cut down, can never revive again. Men, on the other hand, have a soul which lives forever, lives after the body has become dust. It rises through the clear air up to the shining stars. Just as we rise from the water to see the land of mortals, so they rise up to the unknown beautiful regions which we will never see. Why have we no immortal souls? Asked the Little Mermaid sadly. I would give all my 300 years to be a human being for one day, and afterwards to have a share in the heavenly kingdom. You must not be thinking about that, said the grandmother. We are much better off and happier than human beings. Then I shall have to die and to float as foam on the water and never hear the music of the waves or see the beautiful flowers or the red sun? Is there anything I can do to gain an immortal soul? No, said the grandmother. Only if a human being so loved you that you were more to him than father or mother, if all his thoughts and all his love were so centered in you that he would let the priest join your hands and would vow to be faithful to you here and to all eternity, then your body would become infused with his soul. Thus and only thus could you gain a share in the felicity of mankind. He would give you a soul while yet keeping his own. But that can never happen. I've never heard such a powerful incentive to chase after a guy. So essentially, the Little Mermaid is promised heaven if this boy, this prince, falls in love with her. So she makes a deal with the Sea Witch. It's actually a pretty brave deal, a lot more brave than the one Ariel makes in Disney's version. Because not only does the Sea Witch literally cut off her tongue to remove her voice, but every step she takes while she has legs feel like sharp knives that are sharp enough to draw blood. This is what the book says. I'm not making it up. This is what the book says. Also in this story, one difference is that she doesn't need him to kiss her, and there's no time frame. Instead, she actually needs him to marry her. In fact, he does kiss her on the lips at another time, but it's kind of a patronizing, not worth too much kiss. Because guess what? The prince sees her as no more than a little sister. Yep, you heard me right. Ouch. Been there, cried about that. And he marries another woman. No, not Ursula casting a spell on him, and only which under that spell could he fall in love with another woman. No, Ariel just loses. He just finds another girl. Double ouch. In this version, instead of becoming a sea slave to Ursula like Ariel does in The Little Mermaid, the Little Mermaid actually would just turn into sea foam if the deal falls through. So he marries another girl, and that night the Little Mermaid is set to die. But her sisters come to her. They've gotten all their hair chopped off because that's what they had to trade into the Sea Witch for this one chance for the Little Mermaid. And the chance that they have for her is that if she takes this knife that her sisters bring to her and she plunges it into the heart of the prince and kills him, then she will get to return to her family. So the Little Mermaid takes this knife and she approaches the prince who's in his wedding bed with his new princess. Just as she considers plunging this knife into the prince's heart, she can't do it. She loves him too much and she's too kind anyway. She throws the knife into the sea and she herself also jumps into the sea and bubbles into sea foam, knowing that she will die and will have no immortal soul. However, because of this good deed that she's done, she is greeted by the daughters of the air, these almost spirit-like beings who tell her that she's entered a sort of purgatory. If for the next 300 years or so she can continue to do good deeds for human beings, then she may, just may, get an immortal soul. It's kind of a happy ending after all. And guess what? She didn't need a boy for it. The lesson's a little bit better, if we're being honest. Okay, it's time to talk about the problems with Disney's The Little Mermaid. But first, something that I find kind of beautiful that you may not know about is that Walt Disney himself actually explored the idea of producing The Little Mermaid before he died. So he made a short film that was a little more true to Hans Christian Andersen's version of The Little Mermaid than the eventual Disney film was. And unfortunately, he died in 1966, so never really got to pursue that project further or make it public. However, as you may know, Disney struggled post-Walt's death to have success. They really struggled. After his death in 1966 until the late 80s, they didn't make any big hits. It was The Little Mermaid that brought Disney into its new Renaissance era. It was The Little Mermaid that led to the big success of Disney in the 90s and allowed them to skyrocket into success again. They looked at Walt's old version of The Little Mermaid when they were trying to find ideas, trying to revive their dying business. They realized they had something there, but they needed a happier ending. So this led to The Little Mermaid that we all know and love today. Also, I'm low-key wondering if the reason that Hans, the villain in Frozen, is named Hans is because the author of The Snow Queen, which Frozen was based off of, is named Hans Christian Andersen. Would he like that? I don't know, he's kind of a sensitive fellow. I don't know if he would like being the villain in the remake. So let's talk about the first thing that's potentially a little problematic. Ariel's main goal in life is to get a boy. That's all she wants in life, and she does get it. And it ends in happily ever after. She wants the boy, she pursues the boy, she gets the boy. Happily ever after. Classic old Disney princess trope that's a little problematic. But what's so bad with being boy crazy? You can be boy crazy and be a feminist, right? But here's the thing, the fairy tales we share with our children are very important. They actually teach them their morals and values that they may have later in life. Fairy tales have a huge responsibility, especially when they're coming from the one company that has a monopoly over children's entertainment. They teach children morals whether we mean them to or not. They have for hundreds of years, and they will continue to, most likely, for hundreds of years. The stories we tell our children are the most important stories we tell because they fall on the most impressionable of ears. So, if Ariel's presented as this boy-crazy girl who gives her literal voice for a boy, and it all ends in happily ever after, aren't we sending a certain kind of message to our daughters? And our sons, too, for that matter. There's also some other problematic things with this movie. Ariel signs this contract to Ursula, right? That contract is incredibly powerful. King Triton, who is basically a god because he's basically Poseidon, cannot even destroy the contract with his trident when he tries. That is, in a way, telling our children that the law and contracts we make are all binding and they will govern everything, whether they're good or bad. And in this case, the contract is evil. And what's the only way that you can get around the law? Well, by engaging in violence, of course. How did they finally succeed in overturning that law? Eric impales Ursula with his ship. Yes, kids, if there's a law that's unjust, the only thing we can do is engage in violence. Sorry, you've given us no choice. Now, that's an argument that's presented in revisionist history, and I totally get it. And while I think it is totally valid, it doesn't totally bother me because I think it's a little bit of a stretch. As a child, I wasn't super impressionable to violence, I think. Keep in mind that Ursula is actually taking all of these people who don't follow the law in as her slaves. So she is taking in slaves. She has this young 16-year-old girl who she's giving away to try and get this man to fall in love with her, and if she doesn't succeed, then she becomes Ursula's slave. If we take away all the animation and think about that as an actual real thing that could happen, maybe an actual live-action movie with real people, isn't that really problematic to be showing to our toddlers? And Ursula is also interesting in other ways. I don't really have a problem with Ursula's sexual language, both physical and verbal, but I can see how some people might. She kind of disses men in Poor Unfortunate Soul if you really think about it. They're not all that impressed with conversation. True gentlemen avoid it when they can, but they don't swoon and fawn on a lady who's withdrawing, and it's she who holds her tongue who gets a man. And I think that's less of a diss on women and more of a diss on men. That's the sea witch who Ariel has to be careful of because she takes her voice. But is it really old women who take young girls' voices, or who really takes women's voices in society? Who should young girls really be careful of? It's probably men who rule the world, men who set the unjust laws that we find heartbreaking, men who take advantage of girls when they shouldn't if girls are too trusting. And yet, what's the message of this movie? Avoid evil sea witches. They will steal your voice. Who does Ariel end up losing her metaphorical voice to? No one other than Eric. Now, what I have the most problem with is Ariel becoming a shell of who she once was. Shells. Like her clamshells, like the bra. You may think, but isn't Ariel spunky and daring? I mean, she saves Flounder from a shark, and she sasses her dad and walks away, and she goes into the sea witch's cave, and she gives up her she gives up her fins to get legs for a whole new world. That's so freaking brave, and it is. But in the second half of the movie, Ariel loses that bravery. What we see her doing in the second half of the movie mostly is batting her eyes, hoping for a kiss, feeling kind of defeated, being saved by Flounder, Scuttle, and eventually Eric. And when she finds out that Eric is going to marry another woman, who's Ursula in disguise, of course, what happens? She jumps in the water, finds out she can't swim at all, so Flounder actually has to drag her to the ship, and then it's Scuttle who actually gets up on Ursula's business, knocks the seashell off of her necklace, and it just happens to land at Ariel's feet, breaks, and Ariel gets her voice back. And then who defeats Ursula in the end? None other than Eric. He impales her with the ship. And then who actually puts the final touch on this movie? It's her dad, because he's the one who magically transforms her fins into legs and allows her to live this beautiful life. She doesn't really have a lot of power. I will say one thing that the podcast overlooked is that she does save Eric in part of that whole ending scene, but it is Eric who defeats Ursula in the end. One thing I do really like is the beautiful relationship between Ariel and her father. And at the end, when she hugs him and she says, "I love you, Daddy," and he gives her away to Eric, I cannot not cry at that part. So Ariel, she's a little bit of a weak character, as much as I hate to admit it. We forgive Snow White and Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty for not being strong women because, well, those movies were made in 1937, 1950, and 1959. We are in the late 80s when Little Mermaid was created. Come on, Disney, you can do better by women at this point. But it was primarily made by men, so what can I say? Revisionist history proposes some interesting edits, such as Ariel hugging Ursula at the end of the movie. Ursula agrees to come back to, what's it called? The palace under the water. And then Ariel tells off her dad for exiling Ursula, and then in the end there's not a wedding with Ariel and Eric, but actually Ursula and Triton get married, and Eric falls in love with a veterinarian man who has a bunch of dogs because, you know, Eric loves dogs. He loves Max. Eric decides that the whole kingdom needs to go vegetarian because, you know, he dated a fish girl and he now realizes that they shouldn't eat meat. That's my favorite part. I don't so much like to view that as the ending because I grew up with this animated movie that I love so much, but we also have to acknowledge its problems. Am I going to show my daughter The Little Mermaid? Of course course I am. Of course I am. In fact, if I show my future daughter The Little Mermaid and she doesn't like it, that actually might make me a little bit sad. But I am going to have age-appropriate conversations with her about the more problematic elements of the movie. Do I think The Little Mermaid should have a different ending? I do and I don't. I love Ariel and Eric together, but there are certainly things I don't like about it, like how she shrinks to become this softer, less passionate version of herself. Ariel is very brave and confident and headstrong for the first half of the movie, and then we take a turn for the worst. Bottom line is, I'm really curious to see what Disney does with the new live-action movie they're making. I'll always be thankful that this movie was created, but I'll also always have a bit of a bone to pick with Disney for not doing justice by my favorite character. Ariel and all the little girls who looked up to her deserve better. I think The Little Mermaid heavily shaped who I am today, and it's complicated because I think it shapes me in more negative ways than positive, but I also love who I am, and I just still love this movie. I couldn't imagine myself differently. But did it make me a little too obsessed with finding a guy who I thought would save my life? At times. At times it definitely did. Those are my thoughts on The Little Mermaid. Thank you so much for watching, and I would love to hear your thoughts as well. Have a good day.